welcome to the stage our next speakers, Ligeia Ricciardi and Michael De Palma. They will, why don't you guys come on up, and I will just tell you, they are here to cover some of today's most exciting technologies that we're, or maybe we should say most exciting, most sexy as well at CES, AR, blockchain, 3D printing. So let's welcome them to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. It is such an honor to be here with you and to join Jill and her fabulous team. So here's how we're going to structure this session. We are going to, oh, I see, got it. You know what, I think I'm going to stand at the podium for a little while and then come join you.
I'll wait here.
All right, awesome. So we are talking about 3 exciting technologies that are fueling healthcare's future: AR, 3D printing, and blockchain. What I'm going to do is do a brief intro and talk through of the first 2, AR and 3D printing, and talk about their implications in healthcare and some examples of how they're currently used. Then we're going to talk about blockchain, and I'm going to move into a conversation with Michael since he is a leader in that space. So, moving right along, starting with augmented reality. Augmented reality, as many of you are probably familiar with it from daily use, right? Like Snapchat filters and things like that. It can be used in a variety of ways. It's essentially an overlay of real-world technologies, or of technologies onto the real world, as opposed to virtual reality, which is immersive. What's cool about it is that it's not only necessarily things about sight, but it can also be sound or haptics or even smell overlaid on the real world. This is an example right here from a company called Ira, and this is in the patient space. What they do is they use actually Google Glasses, which you may remember from a few years ago, and they've built this into a sort of an OnStar for patients that lets individuals navigate their own lives by calling in a remote helper who can guide them in a specific situation. So this is a gentleman who ran the Boston Marathon with guidance from somebody at a distance, just telling him what was in front of him. Although it also works in kind of daily life for folks who are navigating an airport or something like that, and want to be told not necessarily what to do, but given the facts so that they can navigate it on their own. This is an example of just a picture of it in a more typical hospital setting. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Here's another example using AR in the sense of blood draws. So if you ever find yourself needing to draw blood from, say, John Glenn, it hasn't happened to me, but there are others in the room who may have had it happen. This will help you see, like using infrared technologies, where the veins are, and then project an image of them onto the skin so that you can see much more dramatically and directly what's going on. And they improve significantly the first-time stick success rate. I think it's by 3 times more efficacy in the first stick as a result of this. So here's an example of augmented reality. In this case, is the HoloLens being used in a teaching circumstance.
Within 5 seconds, I realized that the world had changed. It was an immediate realization that this is something exciting and we have to be a part of this. Seeing things in 3D is something that you could do before with some glasses. The thing that the HoloLens gives you is the ability to walk around those 3D objects and to really experience them as if they're in the room with you.
It is augmented reality, it is mixed reality. And what that means is I still see you, I still see this room and everything around me, but the digital content is inserted into the room as if it's actually there.
As a teacher, I can see what they're all looking at. And that's something that we think has real power.
It's actually opening up our interactions with each other.
The biggest drive is getting the anatomy curriculum.
So that's just a quick kind of glimpse of some of the ways in which AR is being used. As I looked at all of these technologies as a group and tried to look for themes that were common, it seemed to me that cost and efficiency was a really important one with augmented reality, as well as just the ability to really empower people to learn and to experience things without actually trying them in real life. I don't know if you've been to the exhibit hall and you've seen AT&T has an operating table that's based on AR, which is pretty amazing. So moving to a brief glimpse of our second technology, 3D printing. As I'm sure folks at CES know, it's about the additive creation of objects using a computer to mold plastic or metal or sometimes even food layers or biological materials into something. The US market now is under $1 billion. It's fairly early, but it's expected to double by 2022. There are all kinds of fascinating applications for this. One of them is called the polypill. So this is this exciting idea that you can print medications, and not only can you print on demand the particular pharmaceutical that you need, but you can combine multiple pills in one pill, which can be shaped such that it releases medications at different times as needed, which is pretty fascinating and deals with some of the patient and consumer compliance challenges that folks have alluded to earlier today. So this picture that you're looking at right here is a skull, which this is the skull, or this was designed to help heal a stroke patient. This is permeable titanium alloy, which is important because it allows brain fluid to pass through the skull. So this was designed, as I mentioned, in Australia and actually implanted in a patient, saving his life. Another thing that's fascinating in the world of 3D printing is organs, printing of organs. We may have all, seen things about printing kidneys and so on. But this is really important because there are about 100,000 people in the US who are on the transplant wait list. And the idea that we could immediately print an organ and stop people from having to wait for either a donation or for somebody to die is pretty amazing. So what this is actually an organoid, which is 3D printing with stem cells, a tiny version of an organ which can be implanted in the body and can grow to actually replace the missing part as needed. So you could have a tiny kidney implanted, and when yours fails, this one would take over, which is pretty amazing. So I put in some pictures here that challenged us all to think about 3D printing in particular, not just in terms of replacing what's been lost, but actually augmenting humans. These are images from the work of the Alternative Limb Project, which is based in London, a woman named Sophia Barista, and I met some of the folks that she's worked with and talked to them. The gentleman on the right is a gamer who was injured in a traffic accident, and she built for him a prosthetic limb that actually shoots drones. So the idea is that it's not only enabling him to live a more normal life, but it's really capturing an element of his personality and who he is. This woman here, Kelly Knox, is a model. She has a partial arm, and you can see the image on the left is an alternative limb that actually is made of lucite and has an implanted a golden filament where you can see her heart beating. So here again, she's sort of using this as an extension of herself, and she'll talk about that in her modeling career. Along those same lines, we have a video clip here, if it runs. This is called The Third Thumb, which was 3D printed. And the idea of it is that, again, this is challenging how we think of our bodies and ourselves and extending ourselves. So I met Donnie and spoke with her, and she's just interested in having us think about, again, not just making ourselves whole, but extending ourselves in new ways.
Somehow we've transformed it into this idea of like fixing or replacing the human body, and that's not what a prosthetic does. It extends the wearer's ability, it extends the wearer's self. It's an addition to the body.
All right, I've got one more for you. This is the first bionic pop artist who was one of the first folks to work with Sophia at the Alternative Limb Project. And as you'll see, this is a woman named Victoria Modesta, and she's kind of owning her alternative limb as something that empowers her. So she tells this slightly disturbing story of how actually, in a sense, losing a limb, she chose to have a limb removed because it was slowing her down. And it created this sort of rebirth moment for her artistically and in other ways. So this was kind of this moment of creating a new self. So because we're doing a quick walkthrough here, I want to move beyond there. I just want to stop for a second and think about, again, our second of these technologies, 3D printing, and some of these big themes that I saw reflected in that as well as AR, and we'll talk about them in blockchain as well. And again, the first is just this amazing efficiency in terms of, particularly with 3D printing, it's additive rather than subtractive. So you're only using the materials that you need to create something and not throwing away a whole lot of them. Additionally, you can see a lot of cost savings in better outcomes, like 3D printed casts heal folks 40 to 80% faster than traditional ones. It's also pretty evident in terms of the personalization thing, that things can be really made bespoke for you. And there's also a real decentralization of power here. You can create things for the individual and that the individual needs at their point of need. So with that, I want to turn it over to blockchain, and I'll be talking to Michael here. So basically blockchain, I mean, we should move this to the conversation part because you may state this better than I. What is blockchain?
Oh, it's a big mess is what it is.
It is.
No, it's the latest buzzword. It's what everybody says. And by the way, I want to get into all of that. I have to ask a real quick question. Where do I get an extra thumb? Because that is really cool.
I can hook you up with Danny. I literally can.
I have to call bullshit, by the way, because the guitar player wasn't using the extra thumb. So
fair enough.
I just have to
fair
say that.
enough.
I mean,
okay.
Okay.
You can take that up with Danny.
That's fine. We'll have that conversation later on.
Okay.
So blockchain is a relatively new technology that essentially works the same way other databases do, but it has some unique properties that allow us to create some unique balances of power in the structure that have not been possible before. And so we actually think about blockchain a little bit differently than most people do, and that is we look at blockchain as a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is, can you take things that are centralized and hierarchical and break them apart, right, so that they're completely decentralized, but create a version of trust and truth through cryptography, right? So if you think about, we as human beings, like everything that we do is hierarchical. If you think about the way we structure governments, if you think about the way we structure, where do you get a driver's license? You get a driver's license at a DMV. Why? Because that's where you do licenses, right? And that's a centralized structure. And so the first instantiations of blockchain were around actually a very simple and single type of centralization, and that was currency, right? So
the Bitcoin.
The Bitcoin, right, exactly. And they are different things. So Bitcoin is part of blockchain the way that chat is part of the internet, right? It's people confuse them as one and the same. The first go-to-market use case for blockchain has been cryptocurrencies,
Sure.
Which scare the hell out of most people. It should scare you a little bit.
I haven't seen a lot of reference to that in Vegas, in the casinos,
yeah,
but maybe I just haven't been hanging out with casinos
a
enough.
Bitcoin slot machine
Yeah.
or something? Okay, I'm sure somebody's got one someplace.
I bet.
But we look at this a little bit differently, and so currency is one aspect that you could apply decentralization and cryptography to. And there's a consensus mechanism that's important too, which is, if 2 million people believe that Bitcoin has a value, guess what? Bitcoin has a value, and that's sort of borne itself out. We look at it a little different way, which is what else can you apply that hypothesis to? And that's where we live.
So humanity,
Yes.
what is it? What are you doing?
What do we do? Let me ask the audience a real quick question. How many people have used the word either patient-centric or data-driven? Anybody? All right, I just want to see how many people I'm going to piss off. All right, good. So we are a company that exists to answer a very simple question, and it's 3 words. Who owns data? And I want you guys to think a little bit about the conversations that are ongoing right now around privacy. And everybody is having privacy conversations. Oh my, you cannot shake a stick without a privacy conversation. You can't open a newspaper. You can't turn on television. It's constant. And everybody is sort of banging their head against walls on how are we going to fix privacy? How are we going to do that? Here's the problem with that. You're having the wrong conversation. And the reason you're having the wrong conversation is, and forgive me for being blunt, but privacy doesn't really exist anymore, guys. It's a myth. It's a story that you tell yourself. You live in what Harvard Business Review has termed a surveillance economy. Data is what makes the world work. What makes all of our businesses work. Many of you right now are on devices. There's a tremendous amount of information that's coming from you. And so we have this data economy, this data ecosystem, where there's ridiculous amounts of information being created and consumed by each of us. And all of that is being monetized. And what's interesting about that is that, for example, I'll talk about healthcare a little bit. There's a huge, tens of billions of dollars are being monetized on your health records every day for companies that you don't know exist. And so what we did is we built a blockchain-based organization that we structure this as a basic human right. The idea that you should own what we call inherent data as property. So we're trying to evolve the definition of privacy for the 21st century, and that is away from this thing of privacy, which is, I'm going to give you this thing of value, and I'm going to hope that you treat it appropriately. By the way, how's that working out for everybody, right? As opposed to property, which has a very real construct, both legally and sort of for all of us intellectually. Property is a basic structure.
So what's our data worth?
Well, it's a very interesting question.
And what's our health data worth as opposed to other
That's a
kinds
better
of data?
question. That's a better question. So I'll give you a couple different answers. So right now, sort of the data economy is about $200 billion. The health data economy, you see estimates depending on which section you want to look at. Some as low as $14 billion, some as high as $60 billion. But what you don't have in those estimates is what is data worth.
Yeah, I mean, can you give us just a rough sense of if somebody gets my, say, medical record? Let's start with that. Your basic sort of electronic health record, clinical data. What could that be resold for?
Sure. So the answer is, I'm not going to give you an exact figure, but I will tell you that I have one. So the answer is between hundreds and thousands. And the reason is, so we asked the very same question, which is, what is health data worth? And the answer is, there was no answer. So we locked a bunch of PhD economists in a room for 2 months. And we said, you're going to figure out how this works and what this is actually worth, and we actually have some answers on that. So we have some structures around what average patients are worth, and there's no such thing as an average patient. So there's a fairly broad spend or spread, and so you'll have some people who are healthy cohorts, for example, that may be $40, $50, $60, and you have some people who have rare diseases who are worth much, much more.
So it varies a lot.
It varies tremendously.
So do you guys, just wondering, make it possible for me to benefit from the value of my data in any way?
That is the idea. So what we're really doing through the concept of property, so if you as individuals own your data as property, that means that you inherit the rights that are associated with property. So I want you to think about some basic structures of human life, things like intellectual property. Intellectual property didn't always exist. You were not always able to generate benefit from something that you created. So intellectual property is a structure that allows you to capture value from your creativity. Labor is something that allows you to capture value, monetary value, from effort, right? What we're talking about here is sort of the ambient monetization of your digital self. So your corporeal selves are very free and sitting in these seats and listening to me, but your digital self is very much sort of in what we call digital feudalism or digital serfdom. And so the idea here is through property rights, you actually have the ability to determine how you want that data to be used. Would you like to lease and engage with the industry on that data? And this is a really important point and why I asked everybody if you were patient-centric or data-driven. Our intent is actually to accelerate data, not to slow it down. What we're not doing is an opt-out. That is not what we're doing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to opt into a structure that actually allows us, humans, who are the beginning of the value chain in the data economy, to actually reap some benefit. And when you start to unpack that, you actually see there's tremendous benefit across that entire supply chain.
That's what I wanted to hit. So as we've discussed before, by you having this mechanism owned, enabled through blockchain, where you have more control over your data, you can benefit, and partners with whom you share it can benefit more because you're actually creating value,
Correct.
right?
Correct. This
Can
only
you just
works.
explain that to folks?
Yeah, this only works if everybody in the supply chain actually makes out. So some of the problems we have is because we actually have these strange sort of imbalances of power, right? And so by creating a condition where patients all the way through the end of research have some value, you start to unpack some of the challenges that, for example, industry has. If you have a conversation with researchers or somebody in pharma or life sciences and you talk to them a little bit about the way they use data, you'll find out some of the intractable problems we have, right? 86% of clinical trials fail year over year. We have tremendous, thousands, millions of clinical subjects slots that we never fill. Why? Because we can't get patients. We can't find them. Why can't we find them? Because we're obfuscated. And so, we've got bad data. We've got, by the way, I'm just going to say this, 30 to 40% of medical records typically have errors in them. So the next person who comes to tell you that they're going to put medical records on a blockchain, please run the other way as quickly as you can. And the reason for that is that, we used to say garbage in, garbage out.
You don't want to lock that in.
Now it's garbage in, garbage out, garbage forever, right? So you want to think about that.
So let me, I want to bring this back to the higher level theme of these technologies that are, reshaping healthcare. And these were some themes that I saw across the other two, and I think in blockchain. Would you agree? Where do you see cost and efficiency?
No,
through
absolutely right.
blockchain?
Absolutely right. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting scenario. So when we look at the sort of macroeconomic effects of what we're doing, right, there are micro and microeconomic effects. When I look at the large scale effects of what we're doing, so what does patient ownership do to research? Can we accelerate research? And at the same time, what's the socioeconomic impact on that individual, that family, that community? And it's actually pretty profound.
Yeah.
And some of the other things to think about in that are around things like the fungibility of data.
Yep.
Right? So what is its value? And is the value for a Liberian citizen the same as it would be for somebody who lives in New York or Las Vegas?
Yeah.
So it gets really interesting, actually.
Personalization?
It's funny, we were just listening to Amgen talk a little bit about personalized medicine. Personalized medicine is fundamentally about data.
Yep.
Right? So can we accelerate data? Can we accelerate its accuracy? Can we go ahead and do that? If we do that, potentially we can make personalization and personalized medicine much richer.
And I don't know that you even really have to answer the third. Do you see that this enables a decentralization of power and a power shift of any sort?
Well, that's the idea, right? We want to give everybody a seat at the table.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael.
Pleasure.
And
Thank you.
thanks, Jill, for hosting us.
Thank you.